All right, well, thanks everyone for coming out this morning, and this is kind of the weather I expected for Washington, so it's kind of nice to have the real experience, so I tried to dress appropriately. And so I was told back many years ago when I was in Bowling Green on a particular kind of fellowship that I should not spend a lot of time like interpreting thinkers anymore, that I should actually like try to think. Which was an interesting recommendation, and I've tried to follow that a little bit. And so I'm not going to refer to Montesquieu or any of these fancy political philosophy people today. I want to try to do a little thinking to describe our situation and then what we might do about it. And so just a few kind of takeaways from last night's talk from my perspective. Is if you asked me what is a this is kind of broader in a way, I think, than Allan's talk. I agree with everything Allan said, kicking it kind of upstairs from what Allan said. What would be the conditions, optimal conditions for family formation and people having kids? Well, first of all, a healthy sexual constitution that reinforces monogamous procreative marriage. I mean, duh, right? But that means that there's a set of laws that proscribe alternatives to marriage and reinforce and honor marriage. There are a set of laws and manners that reinforce having kids and penalize people for not having kids. We described some of those laws last time. And so you would have divorce would be difficult to get or proscribed. Sodomy would be illegal, right? Those are just two examples. You could make adultery illegal. You could make fornication illegal. These all reinforce marriage. And so a healthy constitution, I think, is one of the things that goes along. A healthy sexual constitution is one of the things that is necessary for the kind of pro-marriage, procreation angle. Another element of that healthy sexual constitution, I think, would be public reinforcement of at least a soft patriarchal authority within the family. Expectations that men would kind of govern their families, and with the public behind that. Okay, I think that's also part of a healthy sexual constitution. Second thing that I tried to highlight last night is political energy. That is civilizational confidence. If you're going to have kids and if you're going to get married, I mean, someone called a second marriage is the triumph of hope over experience. I like that. But I think every marriage is a total risk. Under any circumstances. If you marry someone they're 18, what they're going to be when they're 36, you have no idea. And you have to be committed to sticking it out and changing with one another and all of that. I think that's definitely true under any circumstances. It helps when the laws reinforce that idea, but in any event, having kids, it's an expression of hope. Getting married is an expression of hope. And if you don't believe in anything, why would you have hope? So being committed to kind of having civilizational confidence, it can't be just invented out of whole cloth. You can't be living in an utterly decadent, moronic society like Idiocracy, the movie. If you live in Idiocracy, you can't be filled with civilizational hope. And maybe our clown world is a little bit like that. So as I say, you can't just invent it. But I think when you look at the history of the world, you see that civilizations that have confidence, especially when they're new, and they have a lot to do, can take on tons of struggles and bear them lightly. Whereas old and decadent political communities do not bear the struggles of life lightly. And so I think that's a second factor that has to be, that's very important. And then the third thing, and I don't want to denigrate the importance of religion, because I think when you look at the modern world, the communities, the sub-communities that are growing are almost genuinely devoted and pious Christian and other religious factions. The Amish that Allan referred to, the Hasidic Jews have very high birth rates, and there are traditional Catholic and many traditional Protestant sects have parts that have higher birth rates. So I think religion is important, but I don't think it's the cure-all. Like the other two parts that I just mentioned, the sexual constitution and the political energy, are also very important. So those were, I think, the takeaways that I wanted to emphasize last night. Now, none of this is to denigrate the importance of ideology, the contemporary ideologies around gay rights and or should I say the LGBTQ community. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say the gays, okay? The importance of the gays, the gals, the feminist ideology. These are the transgender ideology. All of these ideologies, like, they compromise family formation. I think that's true. But these ideologies can grow only kind of if reality is a little sick. So I consider feminism to be kind of an ideology of decadence. Like, how do you deal with decadence? Well, you take the bad things and say they're good. And we'll call that's what feminism is. And so, you can't change reality easily, but you can change, like, the way you look at reality. And that's what ideology is. And when you do change ideology, you can actually create a new reality. So I'm going to talk about that as we go through, what to do about things today. But I also want to, what I just described, I think it's all real. Like, those are real phenomenon: the decline of the sexual constitution, the loss of political energy and civilizational self-confidence, the decline of patriarchy, and the decline of religion. All of those things are realities. All of them tamp down the possibility of birth rates rising. I think that's all true. But on an individual level, I want to try to give some encouragement or some advice on these matters. I want to maybe try to figure out how we can define success. But I want to say this. I want to start out with this. Like, if we do nothing, if you do nothing, you're going to hear stories like from my friends. I'm just going to give a few tales of woe on these matters from very conservative people who had large families. I have a handful of devout Catholic friends. Almost all of them are my age or a little older. They have a few more kids than I have. I have 5. They'll have 7. And when I get together with them, they're like, well, none of my kids are married. And they're Latin Mass people. They're very serious, committed Catholics. And none of my kids are married. But they're all thinking about becoming priests or working for impressive think tanks in DC. And what did I do wrong? If you do nothing when it comes to raising your kids toward having marriage and family life, that could be you. During the same-sex marriage debates in 2010, 11, I can't remember what year I was down there. I was at a conference of family activists in San Diego. There were 25 family activists. It was me and a very prominent, more impressive than me, a sociologist who was there. And we decided we were going to sit down with the family activists. We're having a bonfire at the closing night. And we had a conversation with them. They were all between 25 and 30. Okay, so these are the front line of human beings on our side in the battle against same-sex marriage. And we sat them down, say 25 of them. How many of you are married? We had a debate, me and the sociologist. I said, none of these chicks are married. And the answer was 1. Come on, you said 0. You're such a pessimist. 1 out of the 25. 1 out of the 25 was married, and they had produced a grand total of 0 children. And the sociologist, who was mad that he lost the bet to me, kind of angrily shouted at them words that I'm not really going to repeat exactly verbatim because he let out an F-bomb. But if you people can't win, we are hosed. If you guys can't marry and have children, we are host. And then we talked to him. Well, why not? And their basic answer was two things. I would like to be known for my mind, and which, all right, we'll get to that in a second. And two, have you seen the quality of men? And now I don't want to like totally white knight for men. I mean, I'm not saying that men are, the greatest we've ever seen, or anything like that. But this was entirely implausible. What is so bad about the men? And like, all they have is sex on their mind. Like that was one of the themes. There are other themes. They play video games too much. And once again, my sociologist friend, who was mad about losing the bet to me, said, if you date a guy, he's going to want to see you naked, he said. And I'm like, oh, like that's the reality. And I think like if you do nothing, you can easily raise girls, like I should say, you'd be letting someone else raise the girls. Even if they're conservative, even if they're pro-marriage and pro-child, it's a dirty job to have children. Like, I'd like to be known for something a little more lasting, a little more important, right? So I think you can do a lot of things right, but you've really done nothing on the central issue, which is like preparing the next generation of your children to have children themselves, to marry themselves. And I think this is, especially among like activists, people who are active in the fights on marriage and family life, it's disappointing to see what their actual married and family lives look like. How many children does Georgia Maloney have, Allan? One. She gave a great speech at the World Council of Families or whatever it was. She stood up to the radical transgender feminists. Oh, and she really showed them one. Right? You're going to drift with the culture unless you actively recognize where it takes you and do something. Otherwise, I guarantee, it's not going to happen by accident. You will be the 60-year-old without grandkids. And I'm not saying, I don't care in some ways about being a grandfather. I mean, my son's here. Forget that. I'm here to help. I'm here to help. It's not like I'm not living through that, but that's how you define success. It's easy to have lots of kids yourself. The actual test is, do your kids have lots of kids? And then do theirs? And you have to think about defining success. It isn't, oh, my daughter is in the pro-life fight. I mean, that's, good for her. But you have to define success. And if you don't, careerism will fill the gap. So, always ask yourself the question, if I do nothing, what is this going to look like? And so I want to really encourage everyone to take ownership of that. This is not a political statement. It's it's personal. It's churches. If churches do nothing, what fills the gap? If schools do nothing, what fills the gap? And if you as a family member do nothing, as a leader of a family do nothing, what fills the gap? The modern ideologies. Okay? We can't do anything about civilizational collapse or decadence. I mean, we can, but this is something we have a lot more control over. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about politics, but then I want to try to give a little bit of advice on what not doing nothing would look like. Right? And I don't know how successful I will be on this. I've tried to implement some of these things. I'm 53. I had 5 kids. My daughter cannot have kids. She had cancer as a 5 and 6-year-old. The cancer ended her ability to have children. And so I have 4 in play. and You know, and there's like that created real problems, like that, well, how do you raise a girl? Like that's always been, I think that's the hard question. The hard question is how you raise girls. I think raising boys is much easier. The map for what a boy is going to look like, we know what that map is. The map is you're going to be a provider. You're going to lead a family. You're going to like set reasonable rules within the family and enforce them. Like we know what that map is. That map is the traditional map. And all the political community is doing to subvert that is saying we don't care about the guys. So it's pretty easy to kind of step in and care and oversee that. But the active propaganda aimed at girls is an unbelievable and unremitting fact of modern life. And if you don't actively counter that and provide an alternative vision for what your daughter is going to be, you will have done nothing. And that's counter-programming. Getting an institution to counter-program, it's very difficult. Very difficult. But that's, I think, the task at hand. All right, but I said I was going to talk about politics a little bit first. Now, I'm with Allan on like tax credits, as much benefits flow to the family as possible. I'm pro that as a way of rewarding the people who are on our side. I don't think it moves the needle. I think economic incentives aren't going to change marriage rates over much. They're not going to change birth rates over much. It's not any kind of solution. You can't bribe people into having kids. I think that's a rule when it comes to politics. The political measures that I would suggest is that are the things that I've written in an article called Compulsory Feminism. It's also in First Things, so I think it was in March of this year, in First Things. And it outlines some of the things that Allan was talking about, but basically, I would like to end the sex discrimination regime. Like, sex discrimination would no longer be like a civil matter. Businesses wouldn't have to worry about it. Schools wouldn't have to worry about it. And because a lot of things follow from the sex discrimination regime. The idea that men and women should have different destinies, at least somewhat different destinies, like that's the modest goal I have, is illegal. Saying that men and women should have different destinies, or at least somewhat different destinies, will get you in trouble in the workplace. Running your business like men and women have at least somewhat different destinies would get you in trouble. You can't have laws that reflect that reality. So the only way to kind of end that corrosive ideological commitment of our regime is to scale back how the Civil Rights Act applies to businesses, schools, and every other institution in the country, really, except, like churches. And now that's no small task, but all of the trainings that everyone has to go through at work, like they come from this act. All of the things that make it difficult to meet people, all of the very compromising laws about men and women getting together, like they're rooted in this ideology that's in the Civil Rights Act. And basically the Civil Rights Act, I think, institutionalizes the battle of the sexes and puts the law on the side of like feminist indoctrination. And I don't think you can solve the battle of the sexes. I don't think you can lead to like societal support for the peace treaty that marriage is unless you scale that back. There's two big acts. I'm not really talking about the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which ended sex discrimination in hiring, and the amendments to it are called Title IX that happened in the early 70s. The big thing is the 1991 Civil Rights Act that was signed by George H.W. Bush. And what that act did was increase rewards for those who have found sex discrimination in the workplace. Like, it went from being like you take remedial action to you can win millions and millions of dollars. And so every workplace then had an incentive now to police what was going on in its workplace and to kind of end free speech in the workplace in order to make sure no one was offended, because if you were offended, you could call it sexual harassment, and sexual harassment is just an expression of sexual discrimination that's banned by the '64 Civil Rights Act. So it increased all of these monetary rewards for people who found sex discrimination. Like, to me, like, that's a realistic thing you could go after. Like, let's cap rewards. Let's scale it back so that workplaces don't have to, like, make it a toxic environment. So I do think that there are, like, legal changes that could, you know, like, over the long term, reshape workplaces and schools they would be, like, healthier than they are now. Like, that's my inspiring speech. That wasn't very inspiring, was it? And yeah, because the reality is that, you know, this new approach of civil rights is what educates our young girls. So young girls, like anyone under the age of 30, think this is the worst time for women to be alive for their choices. They've never been more discriminated against, according to those women, than they are now. There used to be, like, ads in the newspaper that would be like, we want, like, a man for this job. And that was legal, and, like, you know, I'm not gonna state my opinion about that. But, like, so it was real, like, live discrimination. Like, today, it's worse, according to, like, a majority, 65% of women under 30, 18 to 30, think that they've never been more discriminated against. Like, it's hard to imagine that's reality, right? So I think, like, that's traceable to this entire civil rights approach. But, like, I'm telling you that if young women continue to have that view, like, the battle of the sexes will not be ending in peace treaties. Right? And your daughters will have that view unless you actively educate against it. Does this make sense to everyone? That will be their view. That's the default view in America now. And unless you educate against it, it's your future. All right, that's the end of politics, I guess. I told you I wasn't going to talk about Montesquieu, but I want to quote him. Okay? One of the great things that Montesquieu does in that essay is he says, like, women aren't into having children. Like, they're not into it. Lots of things get in the way of women having children. Here's his list. Their way of thinking, their character, their passions, their fantasies, their caprices, their idea of preserving their beauty, the encumbrance of pregnancy, disturb propagation in 1,000 ways. Which means that it's actually a project to prepare young girls to be married wives and to be mothers. It's actually a project that needs to be supported by, like, shaping their way of thinking, shaping their fantasies, shaping their caprices. I think about the idea of beauty. Like, this is something I've written on. I mean, it's a very interesting thing. Tom Wolfe, who's an author, who's now dead, but a great author of my lifetime, wrote a book called Man in Full. And he has this idea, what is a beautiful woman in the 2000s? Maybe it was written in the late 90s. What is a beautiful woman? And he calls them, like, he has them running all around the novel, he calls them boys with boobs. Now, it's very interesting. Now, what does that mean? Like, it means very fit, very skinny. The one difference is breasts. Now, is that a figure that leads to having children? The old ideas of beauty are like women are bigger, They have different shapes, right? I mean, when you watch the old There Ain't Nothing Like a Dame video from South Pacific, too old for this crowd, I'm sorry, but you should watch it. It's a great song. Women have hourglass figures. Like, that's a pro-natality view of beauty. Is our image of beauty support actually having children? And like Wolf's point was, like, not really. And so everything affects, like, whether women or girls will decide whether or not to have children and whether or not to marry. Okay, and so I love that quote, that quotation by Montesquieu. Their way of thinking, their character, their passions, their fantasies, their caprices, their idea of preserving their beauty, the encumbrance of pregnancy, disturb propagation in 1,000 ways. Okay? So, like, this is just a way, like, you have to be pretty intentional about all those things. And I don't know that girls are the ultimate key in this. Obviously, it takes two to tango on these matters. But if you do nothing, the way our culture interprets all of those things is going to win out. All right, so in order to give practical advice, what I want to do is, like, go through the things that disturb having children and marrying, and so the sexual constitution, the problem of politics and religion, and then talk about how we as fathers can kind of rise to the occasion on these matters, all right? One of the things I really agreed with that Allan said is that in order to raise the birth rate, that you need to promote marriage and having kids. That was good. And the question is, like, how do you do each of those things, right? How do you promote early marriage? How do you promote them being fecund ultimately? Okay? And so that's what we're kind of dealing with. Now, how do you deal with the problem of civilizational confidence that we've talked about? Now, I propose not lying, right? And, but not being excessively, like, doomer on these matters. Like, doom is not impending. My approach on this throughout my life has been, America is the best that the modern world has to offer. Now, that doesn't mean I think it's any good, right? Like, I might think the modern world, like, is anti-theological, anti-family, and utterly scientistic. But of all the places in the modern world, this is the best place to be in order to raise families and have children, right? It's still the most religious country in the, you know, like, give or take, in the Western world. Has a decent, it's not South Korea or Sweden when it comes to its birth rate. There's more kind of patriotism in America than you'll see in other countries that are kind of ashamed of their past. In America, we combine pride and shame in our past in a very interesting way. Too bad it's a very partisan way. America is the best that the modern world has to offer. So, like, that means you can be wide-eyed about its defects, and you have to actively go against those defects when you're raising kids. But you're not a doomer. Like, you can still do lots of things here, right? This is the best place from which you could build families and build churches that is really left in the world. So we should be happy about that, grateful for it, and obviously try to make America better again. If I say anything else, we could be subject to 501c3 violations. Now, I was at a conference years ago, 2016, in DC, that I got to put on at the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank. And the theme of the conference was, what can we expect from the family in the modern world? Like, all right, what's the ceiling? What's the best case scenario for the family in the modern world? Like, it's not, we can't revive the Puritans. It's going to be difficult to revive an all agricultural economy. Like, in our conditions, where capital circulates, where people circulate, where the sexual constitution is pretty unhealthy, like, what is the best you can expect? And, maybe it's replacement birth rates. That would be way better than any other country is doing. Maybe it's like 70% of the people marrying. In the 50s, it was 90. Maybe we can get to 70. Right now, we're like headed toward 50. And so one of the things that I would impress on is that the healthiest arrangement for raising families is, as Allan describes, where there's some sort of connection between the family and place. All of the great, like Alex de Tocqueville, from Tocqueville, the estate of his family is Tocqueville. Alex from the family estate. Any German who has the name von in there, they had a family estate. Like they were nobles. The mingling of the soil and the family identity means that it extends easily, like back to your ancestors and forward in time, and you're preserving it for that. That's gone. That cannot be reinstated, right? We have abolished like all of the laws that make it easy for families to maintain their estates. We've abolished what they call primogeniture, which is the oldest son gets it, an entail where it goes intact, it stays intact. That's gone. So whenever anyone dies, they think about how do they divide it evenly among their children, right? And once you're dividing it evenly, that means you're liquidating the old assets and dividing it among your children. So like you cannot maintain a direct relationship between family and place in the modern world, which means that just like capital circulates, people circulate. Like some of your kids are gonna have to move away in order to get the jobs that they're most suited for, right? Which means that it's like a nuclear family for a while. Now, I think you can fight against that, you should fight against it, but like those are the strings of the modern economy. And we can't uninvent the modern economy. Like we're gonna be living in it for a long time. So, I don't think you can reinstate, I don't think you should be taken with the dream of reinstating the relationship between the land and a family. It's a dream, it would be healthier, but I don't think that's realistic. So, you're left with, what are you left with? The basis for a continuing family. You're left with like feelings and love and loyalty and friendship among parents and children and grandparents and children. Like common beliefs, like that's what holds it together. Like cultivating a kind of family loyalty. I always told my kids when they left the house, don't embarrass the family. And I did. I actually did not want them to embarrass the family. All right. But it was also to cultivate an idea like what you do reflects all of us. And I think now my kids are a little more worried about me embarrassing the family, frankly. And they're probably right too. I did a good job in that way. So like having family dinners, having the children invest in one another's success. My wife and I have taken to subsidizing our children getting together. So like last weekend, one of my kids went up and visited Jackson, who's here, who lives up in Coeur d'Alene. We paid for the trip. We want all of you guys to be seeing one another so that you guys are like on the same team, that you are friends. Because when you live apart, like that's what you have left. It's not like you're sharing an estate. And it's gonna happen, I think. It's gonna happen in most places. Difficult to keep that stuff together. And I think it's really impossible to keep it together past one to the next generation. You might be able to do it for one, but the enduring relationship between the family and the land is gone. So the name is what you have connecting you. And it needs to matter. I've always encouraged like family confidentiality. Like I'll tell my kids things and tell them this is between all of us, and if it gets out, I'll rip your tongue out. And so that it's actually a very safe place for everyone. So that you can share your opinions. I would love to see the laws go from spousal confidentiality so that a woman or a wife can't testify against her husband, all the way down to the children. Like the kids can't testify against their parents either. And then I could really let it rip. So loyalty, confidentiality, I think those are things like you should aim at cultivating among your kids. So if one kid is having a problem, you can actually call on the other kids to help. And not exercise authority, but do so with a hidden hand indirectly. That's at least my recommendation in that way. Encourage the grind among your kids. The saying that I have used with my kids is that we live in an oligarchy, so you have to be rich. So that means you have to try to get intelligent work. You have to do intelligent work, find work that will be based on merit and that can lead to wealth for yourself and intergenerational wealth under the best of circumstances. That's a way of kind of stimulating the struggle, the civilizational struggle that people take on lightly. Yes, all right, so that's good. My next piece of advice is a more difficult one, because I don't know exactly how you do it, but I think it's like the crucial thing. You need to be attached to a fertility cult. Attached to a fertility cult. Now, cult, of course, is a word for culture. It's rooted in piety. But the only thing that when you look at like the stats on these matters that really acts as a prophylactic against the regime is a fertility cult. That's why, like, we look at the Hasidic Jews, look at the Amish. They reject hook, line, and sinker the modern world. How can you simulate those cults locally, where your families are, where it's not weird to have 4 kids? If you were in San Francisco and you had 4 kids, people would look at you like you're very strange. Like, human beings can't live like that. You can't say, well, don't care about what people say. You need to be in a place where people are about the same thing. And as Allan described, I think, with the public schools, there were holdouts. And they had more kids. And then there's those who went with the drift of the regime, and they had fewer. That was a species of fertility cult, and probably based around certain kinds of churches, although I don't know that study that you were talking about did mention that. Maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A. But I think that's a crucial thing, because I don't think it's theology that matters. I think it's social reinforcement that matters. Hopefully rooted in the proper theology. But I would say that the experience that I've had with very pious people who still don't get married because they're into the ideas and into the theology, would suggest that you need more than theology. Theology ain't enough. There also needs to be social reinforcement for the choices and the priorities that you're making. I can't quantify this, but I've seen it. And yes, I've seen it too much to know that it's just something I'm making up. The most pernicious of these things is the thing I mentioned before, young women who want to be known for their minds. Now, I never, I'm glad that you have a good mind. But if that's what you want to be known for, you're not going to have kids. I'm really happy that Willa Cather didn't have kids. She's my favorite author, American author of the early 20th century. Wrote great books. A Lost Lady, my favorite novel written in America. Wonderful, but several really great novels. Didn't have kids. She was known for her mind. That's a model of female achievement. And that's the default model. So I think it's a very tricky thing dealing with girls because they go to school, and that's fine. That's good. That's good. I mean, I think that's one of the facts of the world. They're going to learn. They're going to be educated. We can't and don't fight against that. But how do you do that while valuing something else as more important? Or at least as equally important. If you don't read that book. You can still live the life that we want you to live. But if you're not a mother, you won't. And I think like that's the trickiest, hardest thing to deal with right now for parents. The only model for female success is the be known for your mind. The only publicly acceptable one. And if you do something different and you're not in a fertility cult, you're a freak. Okay? And so I think that's the priority on that matter. So Christian doctrine is not enough. Civilizational confidence, I don't think that's enough. We're not going to have a healthy sexual constitution. But we can do a lot of these things very locally. And it seems to me that that's the aspiration that you guys have here at Westminster Presbyterian. I know that it's the aspiration of various places. Moscow, Idaho has churches that are dedicated to these things, and other cities in the Midwest are dedicated themselves to Catholic versions of this. And generally, we'll see if they last for more than one generation. 2 or 3 generations, that's the test on all of these matters. And it's a matter of handing things down, having the chain go from one generation to the next. It's not an easy matter. It can only be done intentionally. Because if we do nothing, it's the birth dearth. So those are some of my recommendations on what to do on these matters. And I thank you guys for your attention today.